Thank you very much indeed. I sort of thought up this title because it means I can say virtually anything. But before I start, let me give you a warning. What you've got to hear today is secret. Don't pass it on, and in particular, don't give it in official circumstances. If you're taking an exam, don't put down what I've said in your papers because it's wrong. It's secret, it's hidden. So put down the right things and not what I'm going to tell you now. Now, how do I make this go? Let me see. Well, first of all, secret number one. Why do we do archaeology? Well, there are many reasons. We're all nutcases, otherwise you wouldn't be here. We have this sort of funny feeling, both that we want to scrabble in the earth and at the same time tell the story of mankind. It's a combination of the two. What we don't do is we don't do it for money. I've never yet heard anyone sort of say, well, yes, I was a merchant banker, but it was too hard work, so I decided to become an archaeologist because, yes, that's right. Because it's more fun, it's easier work and nicer work, and pays almost as well. You never hear part two of that. We do it because we love it. So if we love it, it means, right, we're all amateur archaeologists. There are, of course, lots of people who say, oh, archaeology is a profession now. Well, yes, there are a lot of us who do actually earn our living, more or less, from archaeology. But basically, we do it from love because we think it's wonderful. And this is what gives archaeology its biggest sort of problem, this sort of tension between being an amateurism and being a professionalism. And I think one should never become too professional in archaeology. You've got to pretend, those who actually go work on these developer funding, you've got to pretend to the developers that you're a real professional, do things properly and quickly and on time, and all that. But basically because we love it. Well, next secret, I'm going to tell you some of my dreadful secrets now.
Slide? Are you trying to change the slide?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not going to tell you just yet a while. Build you up to one of my dreadful secrets, my origins, that I began by learning Latin and Greek. I learned Latin from the age of 10, and that was the prep school I went to. Someone sent me this picture the other day, a very ancient picture of my prep school. Believe it or not, I had 3-4 very happy years there. I'm not quite certain whether this one here was my parents' car or not. But anyway, that was in 1948, I think. And I started it because I wanted to do the past, and that meant learning Latin. So there we are. And then I went on to my big school, where I soon found that in the Natural History Society there was an archaeology department, section they call it. And I went along and yes, began digging. It was a way of escaping from games in my case. I was never very good at games, never very keen on games. So I went along, and at the age of 16, I found the person at the scene had left, and I was in charge. So I directed my first excavation at the age of 16, and that is the way to do archaeology. Start young, start making your big mistakes. Your first excavation is always a mistake at the age of 16. There was someone nearby called Maurice Beresford who began discovering these things called deserted medieval villages. He said you should all go and dig a deserted medieval village. So I found one a place called Biggin. So he went digging at Biggin. deserted 1450, and I dug there for a year. Trenching it, of course, I found I couldn't make head or tail of it by trenching DMVs. I since learned that that's not quite the right way to do it. But I did find a very nice pot. The following year I dug at Brownsover, which is now under, I think it's exit 1 of the M6. And I then went up to university. I thought, to the right university, which is Oxford, but a lot of things were happening at Cambridge. And in particular, there was this a remarkable chap called Martin Biddle, who in fact is a month younger than I am, but while he was up at Cambridge, he dug this site called Nonsuch, which is a palace of Henry VIII. Well, you can see this model of it he recently had made. You can see, quite well there, let me see. Yeah, this is the outer courtyard. You came in here, went to the outer courtyard, into the inner courtyard, and there in the corners are the towers from which Henry VIII used to watch the deer hunting going on in the suburbs of London. And he dug all that while still an undergraduate. And I don't think you'll find many undergraduates today who have the opportunity to dig a palace while they are still at Cambridge. And indeed, it's said that Graham Clark came along, who was a professor of archaeology, marvelled and said, I've never dug anything as big as that. And on another hidden secret, while I was at Oxford, I joined the Oxford University Archaeological Society, of which I became president, and it's still my best and most useful qualification. People say, what's your qualification? I say, well, I am an ex-president of the Oxford University Archaeological Society. And that normally sort of silences them, because they know that a lot of the key people in archaeology also did that. And while we were there, we had a triennial dinner, and we had Sir Mortimer Wheeler down to give a lecture at one of them. And it's, I think, the only lecture I remember while I was up there. And he gave a remarkable thing on why you should not read archaeology for a first degree in archaeology, because it's too imprecise. What you should do is read history, or, as I was doing, classical history, because there you can get really down to the evidence, you can compare the different kinds of evidence, learn how they often contradict, and you've got to prepare a story which is coherent. Coherency is the big thing. You'll soon learn in archaeology, of course, that you do get all these different sources, and there are these contradictions. And it's no use. I often hear people who do doctoral theses who do one point and say, I have therefore proved that this is wrong. It's rather like you have a wall. If you take one brick out, the wall doesn't fall down. It's the whole wall, the whole structure that does it. And that, of course, is why Sir Mortimer Wheeler founded an Institute of Archaeology attached to the University of London, which was only for postgraduates. And as long as he lived, of course, it remained only for postgraduates. Since then, it's gone steadily downhill. It's become a degree factory for churning out graduates by the 100, I think, and is not what Sir Mortimer intended. Well, I then went off after I'd done my degree in classics and thought it's not really the right thing to become an archaeologist. There's really, only in those days, only two choices for you. Either to become an academic or to become a civil servant. And I didn't know which was the worst. So I thought, well, I better go off, get my hands dirty, join industry. That didn't work either. So I went off and trained to be a chartered accountant. I believe that Ben here, is it, who was also training to be a chartered accountant.
He's doing some sums somewhere.
Sorry?
Busy doing sums, you know.
Busy doing something.
I think he's busy doing his laundry, actually.
But always, as I say, the best training is off the job. I went there and found there's a Chartered Accountant Student Society of London with 10,000 members, all the article clerks in London. And they had a magazine called Contra, which wasn't very good. And I went along there, and I soon found myself being editor. But I never sort of thought that I'd actually edit a magazine. Trouble was that at school, I was never very good at English. They always used to say, write an essay on spring. No, I can't write essays on spring. What I can do is take a complicated archaeological site and simplify it and present it in an easy fashion. And that's what I found in this magazine, and that is the first magazine I edited. That's my first front cover. I'm quite pleased with it. It's quite a good front cover. And I did a couple of issues on that, and began thinking, well, perhaps I'll become a financial journalist or something. And then one day, the great idea came to me, no, why not go back to archaeology and do an archaeological magazine? There had been an archaeological magazine called the Archaeological Newsletter, but it was failing. It was meant to be monthly. It had only come out once a year for the past 3 years. So I thought, well, that is there's a gap in the market. I will jump in and launch a new magazine. However, let me tell you the next secret. If you want to launch a magazine, if you want to launch anything, this is for you, Brendan, don't try and do it by yourself. Get someone to help you. And that is my hidden secret. I found her on the beach, actually, but I soon trained her to learn to love Greek temples. And I then found, for the price of, I think it was 7 6pence I paid for the marriage license, her father paid rather more. But she became an unpaid secretary, accountant, editor, all the other things, and she's been very good value for money. And eventually we produced our first magazine, Current Archaeology, #1, March 1967. A date I shall always remember. We were helped very much by John Rotherow, who did Sharp Publications. I don't know if you know those little books called Sharp Publications. That was his last work. And he said, Andrew, what you've got to do is to get a designer in. So I got a designer. We got in a designer. He was a gentleman who spent 2 days a week designing the Daily Mirror. And designing the Daily Mirror is a 24-hour job. You should come in the morning and you spend the whole day designing, and you keep going through until the final edition comes off the presses sometime around 4 o'clock. And it did mean he had spare time, and he designed this for us. And I must say, I think it's an absolutely marvellous front cover with that lovely typeface, which in the 1960s was absolutely bang up to date. And it went very well. And I think we sort of launched into the 1960s and 70s, which were the golden age of archaeology. This is a young chap called Geoffrey Wainwright, who was digging in advance of a new road through just next door to Stonehenge. And he found a whole series of henge monuments. There they were, ditches of them. And that has become one of the great digs of archaeology. They're still now redigging it. And then, of course, to the left, we have Barry Cunliffe digging Fishbourne. Fishbourne was a Roman villa discovered when the local society suddenly heard someone had put a bulldozer through a field and had found 3 mosaics. So they called in a young lad who was at the time still at Cambridge, and he began while undergraduate at Cambridge and finished 10 years later as Professor of Archaeology at Southampton. And then Martin Biddle, who, having dug the palace of Henry VIII, went on to dig Winchester. He began off, really, beside Winchester Cathedral, which you see there, which has the longest nave of any cathedral. That's a great Norman one. What people didn't realize is that when the Normans built that cathedral, they built it not on top of the Saxon minster, but beside it. And he began digging beside Winchester and found the Saxon minster, which was the place where the Saxon kings of England had been crowned, where St. Swithin was one of their greatest bishops. But he didn't just dig the old minster. He also dug the castle. He dug the whole street of Winchester, the first really street of a medieval town to be excavated. It had two churches in it, and the bishop's palace, and several other sites as well as digging the walls. I think it's still the biggest excavation ever to take place in this country, where the attempt was to dig not just one site in one town, but to dig a whole town and to try and make sense of it. And then Leslie Alcock went to South Cadbury digging King Arthur. Leland, the Tudor antiquary, said, "By South Cadbury is that Camelot," said to be King Arthur's place. So he went to dig it and finally began as a Neolithic causeway camp, then a huge Iron Age hill fort, refortified in the 5th, 6th centuries, that is the date of King Arthur, and then refortified again in the 10th century when it became a late Saxon mint. A wonderful excavation. And I still think our finest picture ever at South Witham, just off the A1 between Stamford and Grantham, where there were, a farmer wanted to bulldoze his field. He got a climbed up grant in that case for it. So he got a grant to plough it all up because it was a stony field. And then the Ministry of Works had put in a lot of money to excavate this medieval monastery, minor monastery. And I think he spent several days weeding that site to get that particular photograph. And then Barry Cunliffe went on to dig at Danebury, the great there, where he spent, I think, 20 years. This is an early excavation, early time. When I went there with my son, Robert, who you see there, standing to attention to be photographed by his father in the middle of the ramparts. But the most dramatic thing in those early days came in 1973 with the foundation of the rescue. This was, yes, certainly the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in archaeology, because suddenly people said, no, it's quite wrong to spend all your time doing research excavations, digging, as they said, on sun-drenched hill forts. The phrase that everyone used. What you've got to do is to go down and do rescue archaeology, because the archaeology is being bulldozed away in the towns, in the countryside, in roads, and also in forestation, which is the other thing, the fourth of those things. And with great enthusiasm, we had a big meeting, 500 people attended, and there was a terrific campaign in Parliament, because Graham Thomas, who was also founded a magazine called Archaeology Today, I think. No, Popular Archaeology originally. He got in a PR man, and they realized that the MPs were building for themselves a new car park, digging out the courtyard in front of the House of Commons. and they were doing no archaeology. And day after day in The Guardian, they pounded away at these wicked MPs who were neglecting the archaeology on their own doorstep. And if you hit MPs hard enough, they will respond. And they responded by doubling the amount of money they spent on archaeology. It went from all of £200,000 a year to £400,000 a year. And the following year they increased it again to £800,000 a year. The next year it slowed down rather. It went up to 1.2 million. And that felt a bit disastrous, a mere 50% increase. People began to talk about the cuts because it was, but it meant that in those magic years, 1973 to 1976, everyone who graduated from archaeology got a job. And the heads of all the units which were set up in this time to do rescue archaeology lasted for about 40 years. They've been retiring, in fact, in the last 10 years, which is why there's been quite a turnover at the top of rescue archaeology units. So this was a great change for archaeology, and the amount of archaeology done certainly increased very much. However, there's also another side to it. When the Prehistoric Society reached its 50th anniversary in, I think, 1983, their secretary did a plan, as you see here, of their membership. And as you see, it began up, began after the war and went up steadily. The arrows are where they increased subscriptions, which had virtually no difference at all, until 1973. And in 1973, their membership began to go down. So they began to look at other societies. And there's the Roman Society, and they found exactly the same thing. And the Medieval Society, which is a younger society, was only founded in the 1950s, that too went up rapidly to 1973, when it began to decline. And then the Royal Archaeological Institute, which is one of the most venerable societies, having been founded in 1846, they too lost their rapid climb in 1973. So this, I think, shows one of the interesting things about archaeology, that there's a seesaw relationship between professional archaeology, government-funded archaeology, and amateur archaeology. And that is when it began to turn down. Well, yes, archaeology went on, we went on steadily, and I think I'll now come on to another hidden secret of what the Tories did for archaeology. There's a great belief that socialists are all very keen on archaeology, and conservatives, despite their name, don't really care for archaeology at all. But what they did was quite interesting. It took them quite a long time, but under this chap, in case you don't know, that's John Major, who was Prime Minister from, what, 1991 to 96, was it? And two things happened in those years. The first was the introduction of PPG 16, that is developer funding for archaeology, so that the government no longer pays, but the developer pays for excavation. And the other thing was the Heritage Lottery Fund. I wasn't very keen on the Heritage Lottery Fund. It seemed to me to be, I don't really believe in gambling, and it seems that the government really shouldn't set up a lottery, but it did, and they give 20% of the profits to the heritage. I suppose the people who actually buy tickets for it are mostly should we say, the lower classes. The people who receive the benefits are mostly the middle classes. So it's a splendid Robin Hood organisation. Don't tell Bob Hewlett this. That takes money from the poor and gives it to the rich. Then that's a hidden secret. Well, what's going to happen to the current crisis? Is this going to be good for archaeology in the long run? Will there be a new thing emerging? Well, I don't know. We have a current crisis. Will it be good for archaeology? There's the cause of the current crisis, John Maynard Keynes, who invented this idea that every time a slump comes along, the government should borrow lots more money and spend it in order to disguise the slump. Well, of course, you can go on doing that for quite a long time. You had a famous phrase that in the long run we're all dead. Really, if you go on a long enough run, we're all broke. And I'm afraid countries around the world have been following his philosophy, and they're all broke. What you need to do is have another chap, is Austrian archaeologist Friedrich Hey, who said that booms and slumps are perfectly natural, and slumps are really quite a useful thing because they are creative destruction. You get rid of the poison in the system. In boom, you get lots of bright ideas starting up, and some of them are good ideas, and some of them are bad ideas. And in a slump, you've got to get rid of the bad ideas so you can start again and bounce back. And I'm terribly afraid that what's going to happen is we're not going to have a big enough slump. We haven't had a slump yet. It's gone down by about 0.5%. It needs to go down by about 10%. And you get a lot of bankruptcies, and then you'll bounce back again. Still, this, again, is a hidden secret, so don't tell anyone that. But will there be some new ventures coming through? Well, if you want to set up a new venture, now's the time to do it. Right when we're in a slump, start then. This will be one of the new growths of things coming along. This is the new face of archaeology. I'm afraid it's only a dog, but there we are.
Andrew, look at him now.
Anyway. Then we give a little plug here for a conference we're holding. Is it possible to do archaeology without a grant? Well, the classic example of this is the excavations at Piddington, near Northampton, where, let's go on to the next slide, where they're now in their 33rd year of excavation of the villa. There is a model of what the villa they've already excavated. In Northamptonshire there is no county museum, so they didn't know what to do with their finds, so they bought their own museum. And that was, sorry, I shouldn't go on there. That is, was a Methodist chapel, Wesleyan Methodist chapel, that because the chap who preached there for 50 years had died, it was derelict, so they took it over, made it into a museum, and that is, I think, the classic example of a thing. We're holding our conference on the 15th of September. It's at Hackleton, near Northampton, and if you want to find more about it, there's the website www.independence.org.uk, where you can find full details. And then another secret of archaeology, or perhaps not of archaeology, but of life generally. It's one thing to set up a magazine or any project, and when we set it up in 1967, me and my best secret, my unpaid secretary, we never thought of what we could do at the far end. But gradually, when the year 2000 came along, we began to think, well, what are we going to do about it? And, you know, really, the best thing is nepotism. Now, this, as you know, is a very, very wicked thing indeed. But actually, we have 3 offspring, and the youngest one said, no, I'm not interested in archaeology, but he was interested in the media. And when he was up at university, he ran the university radio station. So I did the sale of my life. I said to him, look, you're interested in media, we are media. Why not sort of come in and give a hand? I said, I'll do all the boring side, the archaeology, and you can do all the exciting side, the publishing, dealing with publishers and printers and advertisers and all that. And he said, okay, Dad, we'll do that. So we set up another magazine for him on world archaeology, and I have been able to slip into oblivion. We had a big problem of how, after I've been editing it for 40 years, how I should sort of step down. And we sort of put out an advertisement for an editor, and we had a lot of very brainy people coming along, but somehow none of them had any experience or a zip about them. And we looked at the things and I sort of said, look, there's this one which we've sort of put aside as being rejected, as it were. She's from America. And I said, go on, have a look. And she said, ticked all the right boxes, apart from the fact she was in America. So we thought, oh, well, let's try it. And Robert rang her up and interviewed him by Skype or something. And eventually she came over here, and thank you, Lisa. She did a very difficult job of easing me out and taking it in some new direction, bringing in some new ideas. After 40 years, it had become perhaps a little rusty, and there we are.
Wait a minute, I was in the rejected pile?
Sorry?
I was in the rejected pile?
Yeah, you're in America. You can't really, you can actually.
We're going to talk later, Andrew.
And there is Robert, who's also, you see 2 of my grandchildren there. There's also a third who wasn't there. And another secret, a 4th is due any time now. I have my mobile phone on me, and if it rings, the message will be, come home quickly, number 4 is arriving, yes. So there we are. Oh, there she is. There she is, yes, yes.
That was my last ever day.
Sorry?
That was my last day.
Yeah, yeah. Look how happy you are. And yes, we have 3 magazines now. World Archaeology, Current Archaeology, and a new one on military history. Not really my sort of thing, but there we are. I've got some copies of them. I'll bring them over, yeah. Well, this is my final hidden secret. The history of the world is all wrong. I'm sorry. And I'm setting out to rewrite it. The problem is that much of the work is done by academics. And you know, academics are funny people. They like to think that they are totally unbiased, but they're not. They all have a very distinct bias. Look at the newspapers they read. They all read The Guardian. Ask how many copies of The Telegraph are sold on university campus. I think you'll find it about 0. I'm in the middle, I read The Times. But, and all their sort of theoretical background for archaeology is all with lots of Marxist ideas which they read and believe. So I am tackling it from another point of view. I am tackling it from the point of view of hidden secret is money. In the basic thing you learn, there are 2 revolutions. There was the Neolithic Revolution when man gave up being a hunter and gatherer and became a farmer. And the Industrial Revolution when we learned about steam engines, and I still was in it and learning about computers. Now I think there's 3 revolutions. There's the Neolithic Revolution. In the middle was the money revolution, which is Greece and Rome, is something entirely different. And only thirdly is the Industrial Revolution. Well, I always like to start off with a bit of anthropology. The Polish anthropologist Malinowski, who in 1913 went off to the Trobriand Islands in the South Pacific. And I love this photo here because down the bottom right hand, there's the beach. There is the huts that have the canoes in them. This is and there is the anthropologist's tent. Very sort of a bit of European culture in the middle of in the Polynesia. And he really, for the first time, worked out how it is that people work in a pre-money economy. People didn't think they work by barter, which is not actually true. They do barter a certain amount, but they work by what is called gift exchange, or as I've called a feudal society, where everyone works for 2 or 3 days a week on the Lord's field, and in return the Lord gives him out certain things, what he needs. And this pre-money economy can work very well. This is one of the classic examples of it in the Palace of Knossos in Crete, the great Minoan civilization. But what one notices when it goes round is the vast numbers of these storage jars, because everyone had to give a percentage of their produce to the king who stored it, and you showed off your prestige by the amount and size of your storage jars. On the great festivals, of course, the king would then give out from his storage jars the goods that he stored. I hope I have a picture of the Minoan linear bead tablets. Because one of the exciting things about the Minoan civilization is that in the 1950s the tablets were deciphered. Everyone was disappointed about this because they thought there'd be all sorts of literature or religion. They weren't, they were accounts. Because in these sort of societies, the sheep were not owned by individual people. The sheep were all owned by the king, and the king needed to keep track of where his sheep were. And you do get this very elaborate accounting system, which I think is really much more interesting than some of the ritual prayers that you get in Egyptian society. Well, let's come on to the invention of money, which happened in Greece in the 6th and 5th century BC. Now again, this is a hidden secret. You have to be very careful about this, because you tell a classicist that the secret of Greece and Rome was that they were the world's first money economies, they will look at you in amazement. They've come into classics in order to escape from money. They think that they're living in a lovely, pure society where people wrote plays and did poetry and wrote marvelous history. They don't realize that in fact it was an extremely efficient society without the bureaucracy. The important, there are some of the early coins in Athens with the famous owls on them. They were always known as owls. There's an Athenian owl, another one up there, and that, of course, is Athena. But if you turn the other side from the Parthenon, you see that the actual center of Athens was the agora, or marketplace, which had been excavated by the American School of Archaeology. There is the temple to Hephaestus, one of the few Greek temples still survive, And there on the right is the rebuilt stir of Attalus, which the Americans have rebuilt with a great long stir where the merchants put out their goods, and that has been rebuilt. Now, what I have done is to point out that Athens invented money, but Sparta, the great enemy of Athens, was the city that rejected money. And in fact, it's not until the 3rd century AD that eventually they became that in their decadent youth they took up money. What they did is they became warriors, and they fought wars very successfully. They were very good warriors, but their whole life was bent on training people for war. And they have many of the characteristics of a pre-money society. The men lived in communal halls. The women, of course, lived at home, who brought up the children, but the men lived separately, only turned occasionally to their wives just for the evening, and then went back to the proper society of men. Once you realize that Sparta has all the characteristics that Malinowski found in the Trojans, then Sparta begins to make sense. Well, the whole thing about the Romans is that they were very good warriors. Well, they weren't actually. When they come across a very first-class general like Hannibal, they always tended to lose. And even Augustus, when he tried to conquer Germany, he sent out one of his best generals, Varro, who was defeated and lost 3 legions. They were persistent, yes, they were well organized, but actually the hidden secret is that the Romans preferred to make love, not war. And this is nothing particular, it is just a dining room decoration on a street in Pompeii. And you go down the main thing to their peristyle, where the dining room was, and there is this portrait there, which obviously the owner of the house liked to show his guests. I suspect that the actual body is simply a standard one from a catalogue. The face, however, is different. The face is a personal one, and Roman hairstyles changed very rapidly. Just as today, if you look at an old photograph, you can normally date it to a certain extent by reference to the length of the women's skirts. So in classical Rome, you can date things by looking at the lady's hairstyle. And that hairstyle, I am sure, dates to 60 to 80 AD. And so does the necklace she has around her neck. So what the owner of the house did, he had the painter paint a standard body and then put his wife's head on it. So when you came in, there was a picture of his naked wife on the dining room. You know, he's very proud of it. I'm told there are people today who do have portraits of their wives painted and put up in their dining room, but I've never been invited to dinner in any of these houses. And this is the secret. Well, what was the secret of Rome? I believe that it took off in the 3rd century BC, when they were fighting against their neighbors, the Latins. And eventually, after a long tussle, they managed to win. And, oh dear, it's warm here.
You always get warm when you talk about the Romans.
Yes. And there was a debate in the Senate, and they said, now look, what are we going to do about these Latins? Are we going to suppress them, or are we going to make friends of them? Are we going to have them on our side? And so they invented these 3 Latin rites, or jus, which I think form the backbone of Rome's relations with her allies. This, I think, is the secret of Rome. Not that they won their wars, but that when they won their wars, they kept the people, they made the peace. They always won the peace. So that 30 years later, you find the people who've been defeated suddenly appearing on the Roman side as one of their great supporters. Well, there are three of these. There's the jus commerci, the commercial right, which meant they had free trade with the rest of the Roman world, which was a great benefit. Then the jus migrationis, the right of migration. Now this is very much a crucial right, because in most primitive societies, you are tied to the land. Indeed, this is the definition of the serf. And one of the problems in Russia in the 19th century was that the serf was tied to the land and you couldn't move. And of course it meant great difficulty for the second son, because if the first son inherited, the second son didn't quite know what to do. Whereas in the Roman world, the second son could migrate to the city, set up by himself, and become successful. And then the third one was the jus connubii, the right of marriage. You know, in this world today, the big thing in life is when you decide who you're going to get married. And who decides? You decide, or does your mother decide? Does the tribe decide? Because in much of the world, it's your mother or the tribe who decides. And we still see this happening in this country with some of the immigrants from particularly Pakistan, where still it's the mother who says, well, my dear, I found a very nice girl for you, and you're going to get married next week. Well, this is a thing that the Romans broke up. They had this right of marriage. You could marry anyone within the Roman world, and you decided. And it was the end of this kinship rights. And if you study anthropology, kinship is always a very big element of a pre-market economy. So there we are. We have a big thing these days about democracy, which I tend to think is a little bit overdone. Democracy is important, yes, but there are other things that are probably equally important. And these three rights, the commercial right, the right of migration, and the right of marriage, are in many ways, they are things that affect you the whole time. Whereas democracy, you only vote once every 5 years. So I think this is... And then the decline and fall. Well, why did the Roman Empire decline and fall? Well, the classic answer given by Gibbon is that it was due to the attacks of barbarians from without and the Christians from within. Well, I suspect that equally with this, perhaps even more important, was inflation. In the 3rd century, money was debased, and you got this violent inflation. And as a result, everything became unstable. This is a haul found recently of, I think, thousands of these debased coins. And eventually the Roman Empire declined and fell. As you've been to West Stowe, that is a village of Anglo-Saxon huts, and you compare that with the Roman villa, with its underfloor heating, with its bars, and you realize what the fall involves. So this is my last secret. I am trying to compile a book called Barbarism and Civilization, which will compare, well really, it asks the person, what do we mean by civilization? As I go through chapter by chapter, I put it up on the web on www.civilization.org.uk, which is so semi-hidden, no one finds it. So the other day I looked something up in Google and found that my own work was the third thing that I talked about. And of course we still do our own magazine, Current Archaeology, and if you want to know more about that, the address is www.archaeology.co.uk, which means really but I was the first person in archaeology to get grip on this strange thing called the internet. And people were only just beginning to register web names, and I found that archaeology was still free, so I nipped in and registered it. And very useful it's been, and that website's been running, God, 25 years now. So there we are. There we are. That's the end. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.